Well, thanks for doing this, man. I was just, we were talking. I guess it was after the RGT race a little bit, and you're like, man, I'm riding better than I was in the past. You used to doing 18-hour weeks, and it became like you're doing more like 10. You're Zwift racing a lot, and your fitness is like better than ever. And I'd had like very similar feelings, like, and it's not, and so I wanted to just kind of like figure out the details of that. And I mean, it's not the riding less that's making us better. It's the composition of the time spent riding, I would say, and the intricacies of Zwift racing and the way you ride on a trainer and all that stuff. So I just figured it'd be cool to pick your brain about how you have personally felt all that stuff has impacted your riding.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it sounds cool. Yeah, I gave it some thought like the last couple days and like kind of because I hadn't thought about it like in detail a ton. And then a lot of what you were saying was really interesting like that with like the quality of training I think is like at the top of the list where I mean there's no junk miles on the trainer. So
Miles, yeah, yeah. So I mean, tell us a little bit about yourself. We I think really only raced
I have
together
a
a
quick
couple
question.
times. Go.
Sorry, I don't know Zach at all. So, did you reduce training time because of like something in life, or just because you're like, I'm riding on Zwift and I don't have to ride, or like, what caused the reduction in hours, and like, just some background story. I have only Googled you and like looked. I know you raced with Echelon and like just did this Zwift thing. And so, like, what's kind of your? I know how Patrick got into this and like his was life and baby and things going on. Like, what's your sort of background here?
yeah, interesting story I guess. I was kind of full-time road racing the last few years at least. I went to Marion University in Indianapolis and was kind of balancing school and cycling there. And then by the time I graduated, I was kind of on the cusp of like, I'm almost good enough to like try to go pro. So I'm like, if I'm going to go for it, I'm going to go for it now. When I'm like 22, I have the time, like I'm going to go for it now. So then I did the whole thing, like moved to Tucson for the winter, train 20 hours a week, go all in, like live out of a van all year, drive to all the races, Gila, Redlands, Joe Martin, Cascade, Nationals, and did that in 2018 and 2019. And I mean, I had a lot of success with that. Last year was definitely the best I'd done. Probably the top two results I had were second overall at Cascade in the pro race and ninth at US Pro Nats. And this whole time I'm racing as an amateur against the pros. So I'm like, I'm really close. And the market is so hard to get a contract and everything. So like it didn't work out. And then in hindsight, I'm kind of glad it didn't work out because then this year would have been crazy. I would have been like, there's no racing. Like, what am I supposed to do? So over the winter, I kind of transitioned to, I was like, I'm going to step away from full-time road racing. I'm still going to think about it for the future, but I'm going to move back home to Milwaukee and kind of settle down, get my business going. I have a coaching business and I write for VeloNews and do some freelance writing with that. And I was like, I'm going to spend a lot more time on this and try to plan for the long term and then have cycling still be very important in my life, but not be the number one thing. So that's kind of where I was at in January, February this year. And in hindsight, it was an amazing decision because then I had all that extra time to focus on that and racing kind of went away. And then probably in March or April is when I literally had never ridden on Zwift before. So I just like jumped into it because I was like, there's no racing, there's nothing really to do. I'm just at home riding the trainer. I don't even know why anymore. But then my team was like, we're gonna host this like just one-off like Zwift stage race that was like a meetup and everything. It wasn't official. It was like everyone's like at their homes just like itching to race because we had like trained all winter and was like, well, there's no racing, but we're all super fit. Like we might as well try Zwift. And then as soon as I did that, like, I mean, I got dropped and got last, but I had a ton of fun.
I'm horrible at Zwift racing. People are like, "Do you like Zwift racing?" I'm like, "Well, it was fun, but I'm really bad." They're like, "Well, what place do you come?" And I'm like, "I usually don't finish." They're like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "I usually get dropped and then I leave the world and go do a ride."
So I know exactly what ride you're talking about, and it was when neither of us knew anything about it at the time. It was like, race with me, please. And you're like, fine, I'll do it. I got nothing else to do. And it was New York, everything bagel, the one with the hard, like, clear climbs. Where they're really hard climbs, dude. And we like entered this random race, and actually Sean from our team was in that race and DNF because he was like, this is ridiculous. This is way too hard. So it was like actually a terribly difficult race. We just had no idea. And
Are you telling me this? Is this the race we did?
Yeah, the race we did.
Yeah, dude. I remember I hit some climb and I was doing like 650 watts. And I'm like, how are people riding away from, like, what is going on with this trainer? And I'm like, the watts are there. And I'm like, okay, this must be the top. And like people are just like riding away. I'm like, this is all I got. Like, I don't know who I'm racing against, but this is tough. And I raced with Adam Zimmerman one time, and he was like, all right, the problem is you used the power up at the wrong time. I'm like, the what? He's like, I saw you use your power up and it was totally a bad time. I'm like, all right, I need to really rethink this. And I'll be honest, I had never put the like energy into it. That's what everybody says. Like Laura that we were talking to about it, studying the courses, knowing, just it's a game. It's a different game, different beast. So it's very interesting to hear how people have adapted to that and embraced it and ran with it or biked with it, whatever. But yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's what I was listening to another podcast recently, and they're like, it's not fake. It's real racing on fake bikes or something. It's real racing on not. It's racing, but it's not bike racing per se. It's different. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, so it's clearly working out well for you. You just did super well at the RGT Gila and recently got into the top 50. So I mean, I'm still haven't cracked top 50. Shame on me. I've been doing it about as long as you have. So yeah, I'd be curious to know, like, how are you charting your fitness growth? I'm assuming you're doing a lot of racing just to get used to the platform. And how are you doing the recovery, all these different aspects, and what is it about the platform that has really helped your fitness level?
Yeah, so I think when I was doing 18 to 20 hours a week of training, it was just mostly zone two, just endurance stuff, like 90% of it. I would do intervals maybe once or twice a week, and it was always like a sweet spot or threshold kind of thing. I never really did like anaerobic or VO2 efforts in training. And I still hate doing those kind of intervals because they're so painful. But with the Zwift racing, they just happen. Like it doesn't feel like I'm doing a 2-minute interval at 500 watts. It's just, well, I have to stay in the front group on this climb. So I'm going to have to do this if I want to stay in the race. So I think with that, my endurance kind of carried over into Zwift for a while where I'm able to recover like really well, like day to day. I remember a couple times this summer, I would just to try it, do like 4 days of Zwift racing in a row. And I was like, on day 3 and day 4, I'm like, I think I'm gonna crack, but I'm just gonna try and see. And then I would usually get better like day to day. It was really weird, but I was always kind of like that when I was training a ton too. Like at Redlands, I would always be the best like on the last day, whereas like the first day I would almost kind of feel flat. So with Zwift racing, I've definitely had to learn like go like full gas like from the gun like when I'm fresh. Whereas in road racing, I would always like take the neutral zone to warm up and then like take the next hour to warm up and then like the important part of the race would usually be like the second half or maybe the final hour of a long road race. Whereas in Zwift, like you have to do 500-600 watts like for the first 30 seconds every time. So I'd never done that before. And with the with the racing, I definitely started in like the smaller Zwift races where there'd be like 10 or 20 A's. And those races are always, I think they're more realistic because unless there's like a couple super strong guys, like normally those smaller races are just going to be like easier on the easy bits, and then the climbs are still going to be full gas. Whereas like once I started doing the bigger series races with 100 or 150 A's, I mean, on the easy parts, you're sitting at like 300 watts the whole time. And then you still have to go full gas on the climbs. And it took me a long time to get there, where it took me probably 3 or 4 months where I was like comfortable sitting at like a tempo and then going VO2 on the climbs and then going back to tempo and then VO2 again. That took a long time to get used to that because real life racing is not like that at all.
Yeah, I have similar kind of feelings about that whole process. It's funny, I still actually do a lot of zone 2. My zone 2 rides are just short, and they probably I would say it's reasonable to say that they end up being a little tempo-y, but I just because of my schedule and everything, like my ride window is like pretty strict. But I think it's the micro changes of intensity that I think are like a little bit different than like you go out and you do sweet spot intervals on the road. You're not going to be forced into doing these little over under things that like even when you're in a Zwift race, it's kind of cruisy and it's like almost sweet spot. It's not steady sweet spot. It's these little like, oh, you got to throttle for 25 pedal strokes and that's a little under for, so you're constantly getting these little dips. And that kind of makes me think like, recently people have been talking about how you get better fitness gains by doing like these over under style instead of just trying to ride at threshold. If you're trying to get threshold better, you actually do above and below, and it's that sort of thing is built into the platform. Maybe
It's actually really interesting because the number one comment that you'll get a lot of times from especially a newer athlete that's learning how to do intervals and control their power, they're like, oh, I only have rollers here, I need to do this on a climb, or now people are like, oh, I need to do these inside because I need to like pin it. And we kind of had a conversation about this the other day of just that, like maybe actually riding them on the rollers is even better because the little bit of reduction of power when you're going on a slight downhill gradient, you're teaching your body to clear lactate, and then you're maybe going a little bit over when it rolls up again, and you are getting that like over under without really planning it. And I've never really thought about that. I think that's an interesting thing to have people do on the road, like start telling people don't do it on just a climb, don't try and pin it, like do more over under. And some of your guys' files are like, just when I got used to seeing people do a Zwift race, I'm like, this looks painful. Like and I think it's also the other thing that you said, Zach, I think is really important. We have a lot of newer athletes that watch this type of stuff, is that it took you, an experienced cyclist, 3 to 4 months to get used to doing that. We are in the window when you talk to an athlete and they want to go from Cat 5 to top 20 at Belgian Waffle Ride in a season. And it's like, I'm sorry, that's not endurance sports. Like there's a long journey there. But even in understanding your training, like, okay, this is a new thing. It's going to take me a little while to be good at this. And we're in the like now economy where like, if you're not good at it tomorrow, forget it. And so that's a really good thing for people to hear.
Yeah. So, so could you unpack the, oh, I said it.
I love it. That's Patrick's coin term. Unpack that. We had one conversation where he said unpack that like 5 times. Unpack that a little bit more.
That's my one. I'm giving myself one. Describe the components of your fitness level and what you've observed. It's trending up. How are you observing that trend now versus when you were more road?
Yeah, I definitely used to follow the numbers on Training Peaks a little more closely. A lot of the CTL, I would just try to get it just up and up and up forever. And for the last like 4 or 5 months, like it's just been going down. But then like I look at my peak power chart and those numbers are all going up. And I'm like, there's something not right here. Where like I mean my CTL, I think it's a reflection more of my road racing and stage racing ability, where I mean if I did 5 days of 3 hour races in a row right now, I don't think I would be good on the fourth and fifth day. Whereas if I can do Zwift racing for 5 days in a row, as long as they're all less than an hour, I think I can handle that right now, because that's what my training has been focused around. It's like 1 to 2 hour rides every day, maybe a 3 hour ride once a week. So I can handle that kind of repeatability week to week and day to day. And with the peak power numbers, it's like, it's crazy. I've almost been like setting power PRs for like a month or two in a row now, where like my 5 minute goes up by like a couple watts like each week. And they're always like in races too, which is a very different dynamic, where I'll set like a 5 minute power PR, but then I look at the power file and it's like, well, I did 320 watts for 35 minutes before this and then set a 5 minute PR. So like my fresh 5 minutes, like I wonder how much higher that is, because I don't do a lot of those one-off testing. It's an interesting number to look at, but I always think of it in terms of like, well, I want to apply it to the racing I'm doing. So in a race, I'm never just going to be super fresh and then do a 5 minute effort to try to win. I'm going to be tired coming into it.
Dude, I love you for saying that. It's like the number of people that just obsess over their watts per kg chart. I'm like, this is a great guide, but literally say just that. How is this applicable to your race? Like, you need to understand how many times can you do that. That's great if you have a massive, whatever, 5 minute power, but what happens when you do it like the fifth time? Are you at 60% or 80% of that power? And so that would actually be an interesting thing. I'd wonder for guys like you guys that are doing a lot of Zwift, like what happens to repeatability? Like, maybe it's just as good because you do still do 3 days in a row, and it's these different efforts where you're doing them at the end, like doing 30 minutes and then setting a PR, and maybe somehow you're still getting like the depth of these efforts. That would be a really interesting like study. One group that's doing like 5x5s in training and seeing how they can repeat stuff, and then Zwift racers after like 6 months of Zwift racing, what's their 5 minute on like the fourth attempt, even though you never really do it? Like, does it change? Does it go down? Your watts are going higher. Like, there's so many variables in there. It'd be probably pretty hard to execute, but it'd be very, very curious about that.
Yeah, so I actually did this super long race on Sunday. It was the KISS 100 series, and then for this weekend we did the PRL full. So it was 173K. I think it's like 106 miles, something around that. So it's 11 laps of the London Loop with Box Hill in it. And so basically, I figured out the timing during the race because I had 4 hours of just listening to music and thinking. So it was basically like 12 minutes on the flat part, and then a 6 minute climb, and then like 2 minute recovery. And you just repeat that for, I think my finishing time was like 4 hours and 11 minutes. It was really long.
Brutal.
And yeah, so then like looking at the numbers, it was really interesting because I think on lap 5 was when the race split from like 50 guys down to 20. And on that climb, me and most of the other front group were at like 5.8 to 6 watts per kilo for 5 minutes. And then we kept going for another 2 hours and then hit the climb for the final time. And we probably had at least 10 or 15 guys left. And by the top of the climb, there were only 4 of us left. But my numbers from that one, I did like 5.6 watts per kilo for 5 minutes. Like significantly under what I had done before, but just 4 hours in at this point, and there were guys just like exploding going off the back. And then coming off of that last climb, we had like 10K to go until the final sprint, And like, yeah, this is interesting with the numbers because I don't have a really great sprint, like just pure power wise. But when I'm super, super tired, I can still do the same numbers. So in the final sprint, I did like 950 watts for like 15 seconds and I destroyed everybody because like no one else could do more than 800 watts at that point. Whereas most of these guys can hit at least 11 or 1200 when they're fresh. But at the end of that race, it was like no one had any acceleration or anymore. It was so, we were so tired.
That's nuts. That's a long Zwift race.
What do you guys think is Zwift? I don't want to call you Zwift people. It's people that use Zwift or whatever. So I think one thing that I always tell Patrick, I'm like, you got to be careful about saying like, I think the message at first came across was like, I'm riding less, I'm faster. And then we're like, well, it's not really that. It's the focus. It's that there's no junk miles. There's like, you're optimizing your time. You're just being really smart about training. What do you think is a good message question to both you guys for athletes that can now see this and be like, we've tried to tell people. I remember Clayton Burrows. I always use him as an example. He won the NRC crit championship in like 2011, maybe I want to say. He was getting his PhD, and there's an article. He's like, dude, I'm training like 6 to 7 hours a week. It's just crit specific training. Like I want to still race and be good. So I always tell people, hey, you might not be an NRC level athlete, but you can be your version of very fast on 8 to 12 hours. Because people look, I'm a big volume person. They see me on Strava. I'm like, I can't train that much. I'm like, please don't. It's not going to make you faster. It's just what I like to do. So for people that are going to watch this and say, hey, all right, these guys, they're finding success. Maybe they're trying, they think they need to do 15 hours and maybe they still want to go on the road. What do you think the advice is? Like, what's a good 10-hour like use of their time? I think we've already hit a couple, like, all right, try to reduce junk miles. I think planning is key. You guys are getting inherent planning by racing a lot, and by like when you're on there, you're probably not going to like just dawdle around because that's not super fun in a basement looking at a screen. Like, how do you think people can use this to their road racing, or we should even say more people are like gravel racing and stuff now? How does this, what's a good maybe back and forth? Like how do the two worlds like Zwift and in real life racing, like what tips do you think you guys might take, or what would you modify in your road training if all of a sudden you both were back to doing 15 hours or 20 hours?
For me, I would definitely keep the focus on high quality intervals. So for me right now, it's like focusing on the series races. So a couple times a week, there's the midweek Swedish Zwifters race on Wednesdays, and that's a huge one. Like I've done that before. There's like 200 A's, and it's always like it's a crazy hard race. And because I know that's coming, like I'll focus on it. Like Tuesday, I'll take it easy. Monday, I usually take off, and then I'll do like a solid warm up before the Wednesday race. So like I know that's going to be a high quality effort. I'm not coming into that tired. I'm not coming into that being like, I'll just see how it goes. It's like this is going to be the focus for the day. I'm going to go super, super hard and then recover the next day so I can get the most benefit out of that session. So with intervals, I'll do the same thing where it's like each interval, I want to get the most out of this session. So I don't want to putz around for 3 hours the day before. And then during the interval session, I'm like, oh, this feels really hard. I think I'm kind of tired. I'm going to cut off like 20 watts. And then from there, sometimes there's a domino effect and like you're extra tired the day after that. And it just kind of takes you out of that solid training cycle. So for me, I think it's focusing on high quality intervals once or twice a week. And then a lot of it is like based on your life schedule too, like when maybe you can fit in one long ride a week if you are training for a longer event. If you're just training for crits, I really don't see a huge benefit from doing more than a 2 or 3 hour ride once a week. You can keep it under 8 hours of training a week and be totally fine if all your races are an hour or less. If you are training for the gravel stuff, that kind of ultra endurance thing, or on the edge of endurance, ultra endurance, you're definitely going to have to build up that volume at some point. Maybe not even for the fitness factor, but just being comfortable on the bike for that long. I know that has been big for me going from road racing to I did some gravel racing, and 7 hours is a lot different from 4, especially from like my back and my arms. Like my arms would get tired like 5 hours in. I'm like, my legs are fine, but like I just want to break. I just want to like lay down for a little bit. So I think just being comfortable on your bike, you have to build that up if you're planning on doing a 10 or 11-hour race. Oh,
Those are good points.
So Brendan, what you said really right off the bat stood out to me. It's like, you ride a lot because it's what you like to do. It's what you like to do. You need to make sure like where you're starting from. Well, you need to understand what the discipline you're trying to do well at needs from you. And then you have to figure out like what you like to do so it's sustainable. Like that's for me. Like I like going hard. I like being able to do these races where I like competing. I like others to, I want to be better than everybody in this race. And like, if I'm not, it just makes me want to try harder next time. So like, I'm doing what I like to do, and that's sustainable. So I do more of it. So I'm less big picture. Like I've never gotten to December, done this much intensity and this many races, they're races, and been like, I want more. Never, because it's just more sustainable for me. Like so I think that's key. People need to figure out like within their life and within their schedule like what the effort is that they like, and figure out how that can complement what their objective is and what their race objective is.
And that's also the thing that's interesting with, like, I'm a huge fan of social media. I think there's a lot of positive, and there's obviously articles of why social media can be negative. But social media, when we look at training, you know, you see someone else, what they're doing on Strava or on Zwift, at, you know, what races, how many times they're racing. It's like, well, wait, everyone wants to then look back at themselves like, well, I'm not doing this, so I'm not going to be as good as him, or I'm not this. And you never really know their goals. Like, you don't know what they're training for, and everyone's not going for the same objective. So it's like, I think it's really important for athletes, especially now. I mean, I remember when I first started training, the only social media I had was the email between me and my coach. There was no one else to worry about. Like, I didn't know what the guy, you went to a race and you had no idea what anybody had been doing. It's like, there was no research, no nothing. And I remember when I first started blogging about training, one guy who mentored me, he's like, hey man, just FYI, he always used the term Fred. He's like, it's kind of like corny to talk about training data. Like, you don't want to be posting like what your FTP is and da 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 da. And I was like, damn, no one else really does do that. Maybe I shouldn't, like, do I look like a douche right now? But I just thought it was really interesting. Like, you get a power meter, you're like, you figure out how to use it. Your coach is telling you stuff. You're like learning all this stuff. But like, there wasn't really, like, they had, you know, training race when the power meter was out, and that was it. But so I think it's really, you nailed it, Patrick, of like, just, it's got to be good for what you like to do. Conversation we had about like mental matches. You need to be stoking the fire so that February or March, wherever you live, when if you're getting ready for in real life racing happens, you're like, the flames are going, you're ready to go, not like, oh, I got to go train, and you're like fizzling out in February. I think that's what the January superstar is. Not someone who's fit. It's someone who's just burning out. Like, the training is not meshing with their life. They're not happy. I mean, yeah, I could go on. It's like Gary Vee's thing, which he's all about like happiness and living life to happiness. I'm like, I want to coach people to be happy. Happy cyclists are really good racers. Really fast people who are really sad and pissed off are not good at racing. You can't go on the rivet when you're like, this sucks. It just doesn't work. But
and they're not hitting PRs, and they're not getting better week to week because they're just grinding because something inside of them is like, I have to keep going. That shouldn't be what it is. You have to find a way to lock on to something that's more enjoyable. Otherwise, you know, you're a 6-month cyclist or a 2-year cyclist, not a lifetime cyclist or a lifetime athlete or a career professional or whatever it is. Like, you really have to, I mean, of course you're going to have to grind, but at some points, you know, but you got to like the grind. Let's see. Yeah. So, so aside from the Zwift racing, you've done some RGT stuff. Do you have a preference at this point? I mean, Zwift is way more familiar, but like, I don't know if a ton of people have done RGT yet. We've done it probably more than most. I really like it, but I would love to know what you think about the whole platform.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I recognize that they are very different, and I really don't have a preference. It's just that RGT is so much more punchy, where as Zwift we kind of talked about before, you kind of sit at that steady effort and then just go harder on the climbs. Whereas on RGT, I mean, if you're on a downhill, I mean, you're doing less than 50 watts if you're sitting in the draft. And on Zwift, that almost doesn't exist unless you're in the super tuck or something. But yeah, with RGT, there's the corners and everything too. So you have to coast in the corners, then punch out of it. And there's so much more dynamic courses on there too, because they have the magic road things where you can just upload a real life file and do that course on RGT. Whereas Zwift, I mean, at this point, I've pretty much raced on every course on there. So like I know all of them. But with RGT, there's pretty much unlimited courses on there. And it's really hard mentally. I haven't fully gotten used to it yet. I'm getting better at it, but like you really have to focus the entire time, because I've been in a couple races where the pack of 20 or 30s on a downhill, I'm kind of drifting toward the back, but I'm like, I'm still in the draft, so I'm just pedaling easy. And then all of a sudden I fall out of the draft and I lose like 5 seconds instantly, and I have to do 700 watts for 30 seconds to catch back up. And I was like, that hurt. That hurt a lot.
Yeah.
Whereas, yeah, Zwift kind of has that sticky draft. It kind of extends a little farther, I think. And if you fall out, like you can get back a little bit easier than that. But yeah, RGT, and I've done a couple like 2-hour road races on there where at the end you're just kind of like mentally drained, because it was like, oh man, I really had to focus that whole time. And I was going really hard at the same time too.
Yeah, actually, I had a bad start on last Sunday when for the Gila Monster, and I don't know what happened. I either had a dropout or I wasn't pedaling soon enough, and it's slightly uphill, and everybody started going. I was like, I'm going, and I was like, wait a second, I'm not in the draft. And it was like I literally started the race with a full sprint, and it was okay. Like once I got in, it was okay, but it was a pretty violent way to start a race that I thought was going to be like kind of long and not start off like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about the starts. The starts are crazy because it takes like the speed that you start at is like average of the last 5 seconds before the start. Because at the beginning, I was doing it like Zwift, where it's like 2 or 3 seconds before I would like spin it up really quick, and then it would just take that power and I would go. But on RGT, it was like, well, I wasn't pedaling from 5 seconds to 4 seconds. And then I did like 700 watts after that. So I'm going off the line at like 300, 350, and everyone is doing 1,000 watts up there and I'm gone already. So like the first echelon race, I just got dropped off the start and never made it back. I was pretty sad.
Okay, so I actually didn't even know that. I was starting. I was too casual on Sunday, because normally I'm like amped up and I'm like, let's go. But on Sunday I was like, this is gonna be chill, and that's what got me in trouble. Sounds like.
You made it back and had a good race though. I remember that was the stage where you were off solo with like a couple hundred meters to go, right?
Yeah.
Oh man,
I decided that in that race is better to have the best defense is a good offense. So anytime the pace was slow, I was like, I'm just going to go as hard as I can and make people think I'm really good at climbing. And I'm okay at climbing, but I was just, offense. That was my whole game plan. And we got to the end of the race, and Brendan and I had had this conversation. Is like, when in doubt, lead it out. I was like, you know what? Something inside me is saying this is too early, but do it. And so I just went for it, and a little too early, but it was fun. That was a good experience. I don't know, Brendan, do you have any Zwift RGT questions that are burning in your head for Zach?
No, I think my biggest question was that he had answered of like helping athletes understand how you can use less hours to get better results. And then also what you guys broke down like really well, I think of just having a higher power now doesn't necessarily mean that's going to mean you're a better road racer. It might mean you're better at Zwift, but like, I think it's important for people to understand these are two different disciplines. It's not just biking, just as track cyclists are going to do different things on the track as on the road, and etc. So I think when I see and it's probably self-defense, like I see an article like what we might title this, I'm riding less, but I'm riding better than ever. I'm like, BS, no way. But for what you're doing, 100%. So I think you guys laid it out really well that people can understand, like, okay, there's different avenues. And while it's obviously going to all come back together as you as a cyclist, and I think this, no doubt, this platform will make better road racers, because now you're seeing like, okay, less junk. When am I going to do my intervals? When I'm going to place my intervals? And that's what Zach said too, that I thought was really good of, you might push it a little bit too hard on one session and then it hurts the next session. And then there could be a domino effect within your cycle. And some athletes, they're like, they crush it Tuesday, and then we have like an easy Wednesday. They crush it Thursday. Then they're like, I'm Superman. And they crush it all weekend. And the next week they're kind of crappy. And they're like, but I was just really good last week. I'm like, dude, look at how much you did last week. You're a great athlete. You're not Superman. Like at some point the body's like, I'm good. So it's, I think it's going to help people plan more. And I think having just, Patrick, what you said of like, you have an HC climb in your backyard now, whenever you want to hop on the trainer and knock out some work, that's awesome. I mean, I'm looking at right now, it's like, I'm hoping that it gets above freezing so I can like go do an endurance ride, or I might break out the rollers that have dust on them and like do a couple 10-minute intervals. But not having Zwift, there's definitely days where I'm like, all right, I'm missing out. I need to live somewhere where I have a setup. So maybe next year we'll see. But yeah, no, this is good. I think there's a lot of valuable tips for people of like how to go back and forth and use different skill sets to apply to the other version of racing and training.
I got one last one for you.
Zach, do you have anything else that you would like share, or things maybe you wish you knew before you started Zwifting? Like what could help fast track people to making these gains? What are some cheats?
Ooh, well, you can always lower your weight, but I wouldn't recommend that.
Okay, wait, no. So not cheats. What are like good training hacks? Yeah. What's your go-to, like, I don't know, now that everything's controlled, like not like what's a good random like workout to do, but what do you wish you just knew? Like maybe setup, or maybe I always tell athletes that, I mean, I don't Zwift. So when people ask me Zwift questions, I usually send them to Patrick, but I'm like, all right, I know, got to have fans. You got to like learn how to start if you're going to do the races. You got to understand the platform, like those basic things. But I don't know, is there anything else that stands out to you that like, man, I wish I knew that when I started?
Yeah, keeping cool is definitely one of the biggest things. So having a fan, or for me, I mean, I also live where it's very cold in Milwaukee. So like, I'll just crack open the window a little bit and it'll be like 50, 55 degrees in here. It feels so good. And I think for racing, I think knowing the courses was like the biggest change for me, because I pretty much jumped in to Zwift and immediately started racing. So I never even ridden on any of the virtual roads. So every climb was new to me. I was like, I don't know how long this is, how hard this is. Like I can see the gradient, but I don't know like how that translates to like how hard is the field going to go? Because in real life, I was like, well, if this climb is 6%, if I do 450 watts, like there's no way I'm going to get dropped. And then on Zwift, we're hitting it at 550, 600. And I'm like, how is this possible? So I think learning the courses, and then knowing when you can recover too. Like, learning the super tuck was big for me, because I was like, I would always pedal down the hills at like 200 or 300 watts. It was like, I don't want to lose the draft. I don't want to lose the draft. But then now I'm like, as soon as I hit that cutoff, I'm immediately coasting, because I'm like, I'm going to take all the rest I can get right now.
Yeah, 57.
I've definitely utilized that. 57. Yeah, I think it's 57. Yeah. And yeah, I think learning the courses was the biggest thing for me, knowing when you can recover, and saving energy is the biggest thing. It's hard to put into words how to do that. It just takes a lot of practice. But like, you never want to finish the race being the guy that has the highest average power or highest average watts per kilo. Because if the front group is 25 guys and you averaged 5 watts per kilo, but everyone else was between 4.1 and 4.7, it's like, well, you all finished in the same group. You were just wasting energy the whole time. There's really no point in riding harder. And so I always try to be that guy that has the lowest watts per kilo now. It's hard to do, but once you figure it out, it's like, wow, these guys averaged 50 watts more than me for the whole race. Like, no wonder I had a better sprint at the end.
Totally.
That's a really good tip. That's really good, because I don't think I would even think about it that way, and you should. Like, I think it's either in a book or somebody said it a long time ago. It's not who pedals the most, it's who pedals the hardest when it really counts. So that's teed up for that perfectly. Wally, you got any finishing, finalizing notes of?
Yeah, one more question. So like, of course, you said you did that 1 week where you just did like 4 or 5 races in a row, and I'm sure by the next week you were like, whoa, that was a lot of stimulus. So like, for me, I'm still trying to be pretty religious about making sure I do a lower intensity rest week after 3 weeks of work. Sometimes 2, just depends on how my life is going and how, what the metrics look like in WKO. But like, how are you doing monitoring that? Like, when do you know you need to rest? And if you get yourself maybe a little in too deep, like, what's the strategy that you use to recover well? So like, after a week, you're like, I'm back.
Yeah. I've definitely been there before where I did a very religious and detail oriented approach to that, where it was like, I'll look at the numbers and take this amount of rest and then I should be good. I think over the years, I've definitely gotten better at just knowing how I feel. So like after that big block of racing I didn't race again for a week because I was like, I just need the extra rest now. If I come back too early, I'm probably not going to be as good as I was before, and I'm just doing more damage at that point. It doesn't hurt me to take a week off of racing right now. I'm just going to lower the volume a little bit, do some easy rides, and then after a week come back. And then the next week I came back and like set a power PR. So it was like, that was the right amount of rest. And then I've also used resting heart rate and HRV to track that kind of stuff, the physiological stuff behind that recovery. So normally my resting heart rate is around 38 to 40. So if I have done, I think after the virtual Gila, the day after the third stage, my resting heart rate was like 47. And I was like, I should definitely not go hard today. If anything, I'll do like an hour easy or just take the day off. And then I'll see that number the next day and the day after that. And it's not like it's not everything. Like, I also monitor how I'm feeling, but usually at that point I'm going to be tired, I'm going to be sore. And then I see that number, I'm like, that makes sense. I could use some extra rest right now.
Yeah, so it's a confirmation of kind of your intuition and experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
I think that's really big of like coming back too. I think it's so easy to come back too soon. Like, I'm a very traditional, like, easy Monday through Friday. I'll do some like anaerobic testing at the end of the week, and it hurts, but like the watts are usually really good. But I've come back, like, felt like, yeah, I'm back on like Thursday, and just started back too early, and then like get a week and a half in, and I'm just like, that was a mistake. Don't do that again. And I think it's just, I think we want to ride, we want to do stuff. It's really tough for athletes sometimes to rest, and that's like the biggest thing that I preach, of just like, you said it, like, okay, a few extra days not gonna kill me to not race. It's like, just think long term, take the time, and it's good to hear. I wish Whoop didn't have a monthly subscription fee. I really kind of want to try one of those, but I'm also scared because I think it would be like, you're riding too much. And so maybe that's a sign that I really need to get one. But I went
with the Aura Ring for HRV, and it doesn't really do squat while you're training, and you probably want to even turn it off when you're out riding, because it's not as it's oversensitive to this. Like, so if you're out pedaling, like, it thinks it doesn't quite get like your exercise amount right, but it does really great job with sleep tracking and that, resting heart rate and body temperature and all that stuff. So I've, I don't, I think I found the parallels I need, but I still am sometimes, I'm like, why is my HRV high today? It should be low because I'm cooked. But
So
it's nice. But the resting heart rate is nice to have, and it's good in the background. And there's no subscription, so yeah.
So let me ask you guys this, and this is my biggest like hang up on heart rate of that. For training, I wore a heart rate monitor for a really long time, and then I was like, I'm never really looking at this. Like I don't, I've gotten to power, and I looked at decoupling and things like that. But my one issue is the monitors suck. Well, number one, heart rate. It's obviously like if you sleep more, you sleep less, you drink coffee. There's like all these variables that go into that. Secondly, look at a heart rate monitor. I mean, I've had them. I was going on a ride, and this was the last, so I haven't ridden with one for like 3 weeks now because it broke again. I think it's like the third one this season, and just like stops. And I'm like, how is my heart rate 146? Like I just went really hard, and so I like went really hard again. I'm like, oh, it's been frozen on there, and then I like do that, and it's like 170, and I'm like, oh, well, okay, so now all the readings are bad, anyways. Like I just have. Do you guys like? Is it just something that I have to get used to? Like the readings aren't always going to be accurate, and when they're skewed, they're skewed. But like I just feel like I'm not collecting great data. So to spend money on something like a Whoop or to pay much attention to it, I'm like, oh, it could just be coffee or it could be this. Like, am I just being overly picky and making a poor choice about that, or do you think there's some validity to like we need a better way to monitor this so that it's precise? I don't know.
Yeah, with that, I use a Garmin heart rate monitor. I think it's the dual HRM. And in terms of accuracy, I mean, I've had them. They usually break after like a year or two of use for me. So,
Okay.
and then in terms of accuracy, I haven't had like a ton of serious issues with that. I always try to put it in the same place and like make sure it's wet a little bit before I put it on. Sometimes it takes a minute or two for it to sync up with the Garmin, but typically it's pretty accurate for me at least. And then I definitely know what you're saying with using it and trying to look at those numbers because there's so many variables. And when I race on the road, I never look at heart rate during the race because
Yeah.
it's just going to be all over the place, and it doesn't really matter if it's too high. It's not like I'm going to go easier to get it down. It's like, well, I need to stay in the group. So
I've had a teammate do that. He literally said, dude, my heart rate was so high I was about to explode. I'm like, wait, did you literally lay off the gas because your heart rate was quote unquote about to explode? He goes, yeah. I go, I can't compute that. Like, what the what? So anyways. Yeah.
yeah.
So sorry, not
But
to derail you, but yeah.
no, it's okay. So and then I think for me, I think the biggest thing is looking at it individually. So for me, I've noticed that like during a race, well, because I have to look at it on Zwift, which has been kind of a mindset change because it's always just there in the corner. But like I've noticed for me individually that during the easy parts of the race, if my heart rate gets really low, like I know I'm on a good day, that my heart is recovering really well, and I can sit at a high wattage, still 270, 280, 280 watts. My heart rate will get down to 140, 145. I'm like, oh, this is good. If I'm on a bad day where my legs are kind of tight, I'm not feeling great, like it'll stay up at like 160, 165. And then just my heart is working harder the whole time. And I know it's very individual because I also have like had teammates who can hold 195 for an hour long crit and then win. I'm like, how are you alive? But yeah, it's so individual that I have enough data. I feel like I have enough data on myself now that I can look at the trends for myself, but I know that those are so individual. And when I talk to my athletes, I never apply my own learnings to them. I just try to look at their data and ask them, like, how do they feel? Like, do they see any trends within their own data that, like, if it's higher, are they on a bad day? If it's lower, are they on a good day or anything like that?
Cool. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'll just add that it's just like any other metric, it's incomplete and it's imperfect, but it can sometimes have some value. Like for I mostly use it if I'm actually using it I refer to it, you know, if I have an athlete or myself and it's like, okay, we did 90 minutes steady. What did at this power, you know, how does that relate to what it looked like a month or 6 or 12 weeks ago at that similar? Cause that'll be like kind of like a bread and butter type of ride. Like how did those two, and I'll compare those two. That's really the only time I ever use it. Like, okay, did we see some sort of, can we measure an improvement there from month to month or block to block, whatever it is? But it's, you know, it's just, it's all over the place. Like you guys both said, it's just very imperfect. Well, we'll go one step further. It's very imperfect.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But
Well, thanks, Zach. This was good. It's good to have another voice on here, another perspective, and somebody else out there crushing Zwift and racing. And so, will you do real life racing if it comes back safely this year? Or what's your plan moving forward?
Yeah. I plan on still doing the Zwift thing for a while, and then when real life racing comes back, looking at targeting some road stuff with Project Echelon, and then some gravel stuff with the Panda Racer Pro team. So we'll see when real life racing comes back, but could be a really full calendar by the end of the year. So
let's hope so.
Keep you busy.
Well, thanks, man.
Thank you guys for having me on. Yeah, this was really fun.
All right.
Yeah, it was awesome. See ya.